Hi everyone, this is Breaking the Cycle to Step Forward podcast with me, Chris Tuck, and
me, Beverley Ann. Hello.
And it's podcast number 11, Beverley.
Yes, it is. And this week we're continuing our conversation about having children and becoming into parents, especially if we go on to have other children, but in our case. And we just want to reiterate from last week, if for any reason you're unable to have children or this is a really sensitive subject for you and challenging, please be very aware that we're sharing our stories and our experiences. Yours may be very different. And it's important to look after yourself with self-care, but we want to just open the conversation about this.
Yeah, being real as ever, as authentic as ever, and sharing lived experience, but also from a professional standpoint as well, where
Yes.
we work professionally in our capacities as trauma-informed holistic practitioners of different sorts.
Yes, exactly that. So that's one thing we want to make clear. We're not midwives, and we have got somebody that will be coming on as a guest, but from a lived experience, from our authentic conversation, it's important that everybody's clear on our boundaries.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we finished off last week just speaking about after giving birth to our first children, and then we were going to move on to the period of time between birth of the second child, and that's a lot of stuff for me. What about you?
For me, because it was more familiar, the birth was actually easier for me. And for those of you who are looking at the video, last week you heard Coco snoring. So this week I put her on my lap. She was scratching at the door, just so you could see her. So I found it easier because I knew what to expect. And for me, once I know what to expect, I can relax more into it, rather than it's the unknown for me that is more scary and fearful.
That is just so different to how I handled it and what I experienced. Because for me, I got pregnant within 1 month of deciding to have a child the first time round. And I thought, oh, I get pregnant easily. It's going to be okay. I can get pregnant easily again when I choose to, can't I? Well, unfortunately, 18 months after having my son, my mental health took a slide and I became very traumatized and I didn't understand what was happening to me. So that's when I had my breakthrough. At the time, it was a complete breakdown, but I now, looking back in hindsight, call it my breakthrough. And because of all of that, my body went into a bit of a shock and my period stopped. So here I was wanting another child, wanting to get pregnant, but when your period stopped, obviously that can't happen. So I had to learn about stress. What is it was causing me the stress? What could I do about it? And to cut a long story short, there's 5 years almost between my two children. And the fact that when I got pregnant with my second one and I went into labor with her, it was, oh no, I know what's coming. It's going to be horrific. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. So it almost caused a lot of stress and overwhelm for me. And that birth was completely different from the first one. I'm not going to go into it, but it was not nice. I was in labor for over 3 days. On and off with all of the interventions and everything that they were doing. And I had to have an emergency C-section in the end to save her life, basically.
Yeah.
So you can imagine what that did to me. I went into complete meltdown after giving birth to her. So here I was at home. The whole side of my house was off. We was having an extension. And literally the whole side of my house was off. I was living in one room upstairs with a 2-year-old, nearly 2. Was he? No, he wasn't.
He must have been 5.
4. Yeah, he was 4.5. Excuse me. A 4.5-year-old who was having sleep apnea and issues, and obviously with my husband on shift work, and then a newborn baby. all living in one room because the rest of the house was chaos. So the doctor ended up coming round because I had cold sores literally all around my mouth, up my nose. I had infections. I had so much going on, no sleep. So no, it was not a nice time for me.
No, and I'm really sorry to hear that. Well, with me, I didn't actually plan to have my second pregnancy. It happened, and if I'm really honest, I was pleased with that. It took it out of my control. Because there was still some things that I was obviously what I'd experienced before, and I had experienced a miscarriage as well.
Right.
So that birth went really smoothly, and as I said, I tended to relax more, and that actually showed in the birth. Because my daughter was 2 weeks late. They took me in and said, right, tomorrow we'll induce you. And I was like, tomorrow? And it was in August. It was really hot, and I was like huge. And with that, I suddenly got some pains, and I knew they weren't bad, but I said, can you call my husband back? Because I know they're like really bad. I made them out to be worse than what they were. Instinctively, I knew she was coming. And then they broke my waters because they had to do that the first time. And an hour and a half later, out she popped.
Wow.
Yeah, it was as easy as that. I'm not going to say it wasn't. For me, it caught up with me because she was a girl.
Right.
And it was that fear, because I just thought it was going to be a boy or a girl. I wasn't sure, but I just kept thinking a boy. But then once I had a girl, it was that responsibility. How will I keep her safe? Which I had with my first, but I was dealing with so much with my first, I hadn't considered that. Do you see what I mean? So what I didn't realise is she was starting to trigger me, if I'm really honest, and mirror me. Here was a baby, and it was starting to mirror me. And as my son was getting older, and as he was approaching 3, it was a real mirror of what happened to me when I was older. So looking back now, I can see how I was, and I love this word, discombobulating, and trying really hard to be in control. And, trying, being the best parent possible. So self-care went out the window. It was about feeding my children. Oh, and then maybe I'll have something to eat. It was about making sure that the house was clean, because then I could be the best mum, the best wife. And that's when self-care really did let itself go. And I didn't understand that. And I had my breakthrough or breakdown the first time when I reached out and I needed to speak to somebody, and that was when my daughter was about 6 months old. And I phoned Samaritans because I was trying to break the cycle on my own of the toxic parenting that I'd experienced. And sometimes when we go into that overdrive, I'm going to do this, I'm going to change this, and I tried to change so much at one time that I couldn't sustain it. And that's when I reached out for help. But like you say, it's a breakthrough.
But again, when you're going through it, you don't know that that's what you're experiencing, do you? You don't know that that's what you've got to deal with. That's why I think it's so important, what we were speaking about last week, that if you can pass all of this stress on through into your baby, then it would be ideal for anybody that's suffering from trauma because as a result of sexual violence or abuse in childhood, that they have all of this knowledge and awareness before you actually get pregnant. Wouldn't that be amazing?
As survivors, we carry a certain amount of guilt. And I was carrying a lot of guilt at that time for being a survivor, for all the experiences of my childhood without realising it. I didn't know. Then I wanted to be the best parent I could possibly be. Because if I did one little thing wrong, I was feeling the guilt was just overloading. And I remember that feeling, I just want this all to stop. So it wasn't necessarily that I wanted my life to stop, because I had these children that I loved and, I wanted to be there for them. But I just wanted that feeling to stop of being, I just didn't know I wasn't in control. Everything was in a spin. And that's when I reached out for Samaritans. And that's when I was able to reach out, and I was referred to a charity. And ironically, I started counselling with a specialist counsellor back then, and that was even more challenging to get to speak to somebody who was in that area of sexual abuse. And I'm not saying it wasn't challenging doing the sessions, because it took, I did for nearly 2 years, I worked with her. However, it was a different challenge. It was a trickle release. I was physically unwell as well, but to know that you were supported, to know that you had someone that you could see regularly, and, you know, even if it was an hour once a fortnight, I would make sure that the kids were sorted, and I'd go for that hour, and it made a huge difference. And I didn't realise back then exactly how much of a difference it made.
But, you know, we know that being a parent is hard work anyway, and pile on that no sleep, you know, you do get, you know, a bit testy with your temper, and you get like, life's against you and all the rest of it. So life is hard enough, but when you're dealing with the big rock trauma and you're not quite, you know, you don't actually know that that's what you're suffering from at the time, but it's only when you get open up and you tell people what's going on for you, you know that your emotions are all over the place, you know your hormones are all over the place, because that's what pregnancy and birthing does to you. You're fighting a losing battle, really, in a lot of instances. And this is where I think victim survivors really do need that extra care, that extra support and guidance, really. And I just don't think that's available.
Yes, and what I'm going to say is, going to reiterate here something that you said before as well. Survivors of abuse, whether it be emotional, physical and sexual. The other thing is, as well, as we said last week, we weren't even aware, though, that we were survivors.
Yeah.
Because at that time, we were still in the victim state of not knowing, not realising, thinking that our childhood was normal. And that's where I understand that's the challenge there, because if somebody had spoken to us, although I was able to say it matter-of-factly, but for somebody, I do feel, you know, it's going to be challenging for people to change it, but it's worth, I do believe we do need to be able to ask the questions, because it helps to raise awareness and to know that people are supported, especially as young mums.
And I just think that as well, the message that we want to give out is one of hope and one of help and one of support, because it's like, if you've gone through any kind of childhood trauma because of abuse, any kind of trauma because of abuse, we know people are going to be impacted in a similar way. And if we can bring this to their attention, that if you've gone through this, you might go through this, so therefore you can do this, it just opens up their eyes, it makes them aware. And then they can dot their I's, cross the T's, and sort of like think, oh my goodness, yes, that is happening to me. It's absolutely normal, because Chris and Beverley have spoken about that, and I'm going to reach out and get help as soon as, rather than trucking on and thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? Judgment on yourself. Keep working harder and harder, and then having a complete breakdown, you know.
Yes,
we don't want that for people, do we?
No. And this is where for the carrier of the baby, and I'm going to say carrier, the mother of the baby, or say carrier, the hormones is an additional part of this, because in all fairness, you may have not carried the baby, but if you've adopted, or if you're fostering, or you're the caregiver as a parent, because it can be men as well, you know, some of the same mirrors are the same thing, and everything changes when you have a young person that you're responsible for. So I do want to bring that part in as well, but you know, because we're about inclusivity as well.
Yeah.
And for me, Chris, I'm going to ask you this question. You know, we have our older selves, so in the moment, and then we have our inner child. So for you, looking back, are you able to see where you had mirrors from your inner child being triggered in you as an adult, as
Hang
a
on, I'm just
parent?
going to go back one bit. What does mirror actually mean, Beverley?
So, for instance, again, good question, because I didn't know what that was at the time. So what was happening to me being triggered is, as my children were reaching certain milestones or doing certain things, it was like looking at a film or seeing a mirror of myself when I was their age. So I was getting flashbacks.
Yeah, so for me, writing the book, and really the age of 7, 1977, the last Christmas with mum and dad before mum and dad split up, age of 7 is just when I know everything went wrong, everything fell apart. And I just remember being the age of 7 and looking out for my siblings and being all grown up and having to take on that role of carer for everybody. So it was really important for me that the age of 7, excuse me, everything's just turning on and off now by itself. It will turn off in a moment. At the age of 7, I saw my nephew the other week at his 7th birthday party.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I went, my brain was going, he's so small. He's playing with a balloon. He's eating cake. He's just playing. He hasn't got a care in the world. That wasn't me at 7. And then I thought, how could I be all of the things that I remember about myself at the age of 7? How could that be even possible? Because here is a 7-year-old holding the mirror up. How could I be responsible for all of that at the age of 7? How did it happen? And how did I manage that? You know, because 7-year-olds and younger and like slightly older, we shouldn't be responsible for any of this.
Absolutely. And it's that mirror that, like you say, you know, we're able to talk about it now, but subconsciously when that happens, then there's also another side of that is grief about this 7, you know, you didn't have that. So here you are as a parent, seeing younger children, whether it be other children, whether it be your own children.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing yourself as a younger child, and it's triggering things off in your subconscious. So if that's all happening, no wonder sometimes we find it challenging.
Yeah, and we know, don't we, from speaking to other victim survivors, that they said, especially I think the male in the relationship, that because they haven't carried the child and given birth, it was when their child got to their age, when their abuse happened, that's when it really hit them like hard. Like, I was only a little person. Why did they do that to me? And you know, so you're this strong, big, burly bloke, but you are inside, you're that small, tiny child, and you're going to have all of those feelings and thoughts from being that tiny child. And no one had the right to abuse you. You didn't deserve it. And the perpetrators are the ones at fault. And we have to keep reiterating that to all of the adults that have been victims and are survivors of these crimes.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why, just for a minute, for anyone watching and listening, please take a deep breath right now, because we are talking about triggers, but we're doing that so that we can acknowledge them. And once we acknowledge them, we won't necessarily release them straight away, but we can start asking ourselves, what support do I need?
Yeah, exactly. It's acknowledging and then trying to find the help and support, isn't it?
Yeah.
And often that comes from peer to peer. Is like me and you, we support each other outside of all of this. And it's about finding that person that you can trust and have these conversations with, so you can help keep yourself well.
Yes. So I look back as well. There's other things I see. I see how my children triggered me so unintentionally, you know, as toddlers, and when they get a little bit older and they say, go away, I don't love you.
Yeah.
Oh, that I mean, by then I was having support and I was able to talk about it, but I found that really challenging. It was like, no way.
Yeah, after all this, you say that to me. Yeah, that would have been a massive trigger. But I think also, Beverley, like as you said, you were trying to be the perfect parent, because I think we try and overwork, we overcompensate. And I know some victim and survivors that literally give their children everything and anything, and they go without themselves, a bit like what you described. But for me, I never did that, but I always made sure I bought shoes from Clark's for their feet. I wasn't going to ram their feet into any old shoe, cheap shoe. So even though I probably couldn't afford it, they always had Clark's shoes because it was wide and it was a good fit and all the rest of it, because I never had that growing up. So even though I didn't go overboard and give them everything and anything, I made sure that they had the best that my budget could buy. And I really wasn't into designer clothes or anything like that, but I know some people are. But they always had clean clothes on. So as soon as they messed themselves a little bit, it was straight into clean clothes, because I was worried about social services turning up, judging me, and my children not staying with me. And that was a legitimate concern for me. And I know for many victims and survivors, that has happened in their lives. And for some people, they've had their children taken away when it shouldn't have happened. And in other instances, the children were taken away and that was the right decision. So, you know, that's a very controversial area.
Absolutely.
Away from, but that was a legitimate concern for me. And that's why I worked overboard to make sure, like that. You come to my house now, it only gets tidied when someone comes round, and I really don't give a monkey, because service level, it's clean, but it's lived in. But when I was bringing them up as children, everything had a place, and if it wasn't in its place, I got stressed out and overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And I'm with you there. I'm with you. Ditto. One of the things I will say, it is because of my children and wanting to change the cycle, that when, you know, I had my 2 years counselling, when they became older, or when counselling got really tough, and when I say my therapy got really tough, what I did, I continued it knowing that I wanted to break cycle. I realized that this is challenging, but it's the gift that keeps on giving for me. But also I want to be able to do this for my children, because I want to ensure I can be the best. But you know what? Bring me into it. Be me. And I also had that feeling when they became teenagers that I was out of control. And I actually went to parenting classes, because how would I know how to parent if I came from that toxic background? And I'm actually really proud that I went to parenting classes. And it's a shame we don't have parenting classes available for everybody.
As a norm.
As a norm, yeah. Regardless, you know, just say caregivers, you know, for caregivers. Because I remember sitting around the room and feeling like, my name's Beverley Webb and I'm a bad mum.
Yeah. And I think anybody that, I think there is a bit of a taboo about asking for help and seeking help when it comes to your children, because of that fear and that worry that you're not looking after your children. Social services, there is a real worry and fear there. However, and again, I'm sharing on behalf of my sister, and she doesn't mind me sharing her stuff. When she sought help because she was going through some clinical depression, and she was asking for some respite care for her children so she could get well, social services turned around and said, well, is she abusing them? And she's like, no, of course I wouldn't abuse my children. I love them, but I'm finding it really difficult to look after their needs because I can't look after myself. And they went, sorry, we can't help you unless you're hitting them and abusing them.
I know, and that is such a challenge, because the courage to say, I need some support, I need some help, is immense, you know. And your sister is, you know, an amazing character, as we all are. And parenting is a challenge. What I will say is, when I was sitting around the room, I was hearing stories from other parents.
Yeah.
And the best thing was, like, I was looking at them thinking, oh, but you look like proper parents. What, you don't know the answer? Which, when I went home and thought about it, I thought, no, Beverley, they're there for the same reason. Stop judging yourself. But also, we were reassured that we were good parents because we were wanting to find out.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And we were prepared to look at ourselves.
Yeah, and that's amazing, because there's
Yeah.
a lot of people that blame everybody else for everything that's going wrong for them, and also just don't want to look at themselves and where they are in all of this, and what is it that they're doing that's causing concerns and causing impact. I think as an adult, we do have the responsibility, the ability to respond differently, to enable us to be better parents by acknowledging where we're not doing such a great job, or where we are struggling, and asking for that help and reaching out for that help. I think that can only be a good thing.
Absolutely, but that takes a lot. I remember when I was asked in the parenting classes, do you like, and I'm not going to say which one because it's not fair, but one of your children. And I said, of course I love my children. And they said, no, we didn't ask that. We know you love your children, you're here, but do you like their behaviour at the moment? And I burst into tears and said, no, I don't. And they said, that's okay, that's normal. But I thought, if I was to say I didn't like that behaviour, that would make me a bad person.
But we often say, we don't usually say we don't like their behaviour. We just say we don't like them at the moment, or we don't like them, but that's not what we mean. We mean we don't like their behaviour, but we don't actually say it correctly.
Yes.
So when someone said to you, we know you love them, but you just don't like them. There's loads of times when my kids, I don't like their behaviour. There's probably loads of times when they look at me and think, my God, I don't like your behaviour, mother. You know, we're all human at the end of the day, but it is, you know, there does have to be boundaries and rules, and everybody has to abide by that to keep everyone safe and everybody happy. And there are going to be arguments along the way, because we're human, we're not robots.
Ah, there we go. Arguments a long way. So that was one of my fears, because at home, when I was at home, it wasn't just an argument. If somebody raised their voice, it would go into a fight, domestic violence. And that's the last thing I wanted for my children. So, of course, I was trying to have the picket white fence, the immaculate house, you know, doing all these different things, because I wanted my children to come from a non-toxic house. But there are also consequences when you go the other way. Right. And I want to reassure anyone listening, thinking, oh my God, what you're saying. Do you know what? The biggest thing I learned was through the counselling, through the parenting classes, just be me. And I've even said to my children, you know what, as a parent, I've made decisions on your behalf at that time with the information that I had, believing it was the best decision.
Yes.
If at any time I've upset you, I've offended you, or hurt you unintentionally in any way, for that, as a human being, I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
Because that's never been my intention. And now we do have some very difficult and challenging, you know, conversations. And yeah, it's okay to be pissed off with each other, excuse my language, but that's normal.
Yeah, it is. But I know what you're saying about trying to keep the peace, because again, like your household, any arguments did end up in DV, did end up in some kind of massive upset for everybody. So it was about treading on eggshells, keeping the peace. And that did filter through into my relationship as a mum, dad, all of that. And we had to work through a lot of issues as mum and dad, as parents, with the children. So what did discipline look like? What did the rules and regulations look like as they got to teenagers and they went out and about? Is it going to be different? Oh, Ben, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. My son can do that, but my daughter can't do that. But that's not fair. But it's just because we've gone through what we've gone through, and we're trying to do the best, aren't we, all of the time, to keep everyone safe. And we assume that boys are going to be safer than girls, but not necessarily so. It all depends on the individual child as to what they can actually cope with and what they can't cope with, and and how street smart they are, how wise they are. I think that's
but
what
even,
I've learned.
sometimes even being street smart, sadly, we can't cover every every occasion there. But so what we're trying to reassure everyone, coming right back to the beginning, because I'm watching that time, Chris.
Don't you do me out of any minutes.
I'm not, but I'm just making sure that we don't go on for a whole hour, because the time just flies. It's okay to be normal as a parent, as in, you know what, we can have some fun times, but there's also some challenging times, and times that we don't speak about, and we're sometimes scared to speak about, because being a parent is really challenging when we've been unable to be a child ourselves. And when we want to change things.
And I don't know about you, but I actually lived vicariously through my children to get my own childhood back. So I would take them to the park every day. I would get my little bum down that slide. I would get my little bum on that swing, and I would swing. I can't fit on it now, but back then I could.
Yes and no, I would do the things. So I was lucky, wasn't I? Because I went into children's homes, and those experiences that brought me, really good feelings, even now, they're the things that I want to continue with my children, because in my way, that would be the best way to bring them up. One of the things I will say to you is, one of the things, and I am going to just share this because it was really challenging, one of the things I struggled with at first when my children were very young is cuddling them all the time. It's not because I didn't love them, but I just thought I want them to be comfortable in their own space, because I want them to know that I'm always here. Going back now I wish I'd cuddled them a lot more. But I believed at that time that sometimes leaving them was the best thing to do. So one day I'll be brave enough to ask my children what they really thought of me as a parent, or think of me.
Oh, might not like the answer for that one, but the cuddling and all of that, all I ever wanted to do was hear my children's laughter and make them happy every single day. And I really strove to do that, even if inside I was really miserable, because it was hard work. It was so much hard work, to go to work full time, look after, it was just so much hard work. But that's all I cared about, was hearing them laugh and making them happy.
Absolutely.
But as they got older and they got bigger, it almost became a threat to me, as in, they're like adult size. I'm talking when they were teenagers.
Yes.
They were adult size, and they would come at me from different angles, from their perspective, really innocently, but for me, massive trigger. Massive trigger. So as they got older and my sort of size, I became very, very not able to cuddle them when they wanted to be cuddled. Whereas me, if I went up and gave them a hug, that's different, because my brain is in gear, my body's in tune, and I could do that. But if they came at me wanting to hug or do anything like that, or come into my space, it wasn't happening. And I'm 52 now, and I'm still working on that. And lots of people have that as an issue, and yet we don't speak about it.
Absolutely. And I'm with you, because when we're in a certain mindset and we're concentrating, to be able to relax and receive that cuddle is sometimes a challenge. Hence, I love a hug now. I love a hug, but I'm always asking people, because there are times when someone wants to give me a hug and I'm like, no, not at the moment. That's why I always offer hugs. So what would be your last sharing thought that you'd like to give to anyone listening to this podcast, Chris?
That being a parent, if you're able to, and if you choose to be a parent, is the most rewarding thing. But it does come with challenges. And I just wish personally that I was more aware of the impact of trauma before I had my children, and in those first few months of having children, and that what I was going through was normal, and I could have got help and support at that time if only I knew and I was aware of everything that I was going through. So that's what I would like to just put across as my message.
Yeah. Well, I want to add to that and say, looking back with hindsight, I'd like every young person, and I mean that as a young teenager, a young adult, love them to have the information and the awareness for their own trauma, so they're able to know that they have support because they found support, know and understand who they are before they go ahead and make those big changes, and they're making the choices out of where they are with support rather than reacting to those.
And what's best for them, eh?
What's best, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was quite intense. For anyone listening, please, if you've got any questions that we haven't answered or anything that you'd like to know, contact us. There's details further in the comments. Please like and subscribe. If there's anything that you want to ask us, you know, we realise there's lots of different listeners from all ages, and we have had some questions and we are responding to them, and we've got some different subjects coming up. So please contact us, because we'd be always interested to know what you'd like us to cover. Absolutely.
So it's a goodbye then from me, and
goodbye for me. See you next week.
And Coco.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.